Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from RAU'S IAS Study Circle. As you are well aware about the ELEARN platform of RAU'S IAS, where we provide you not only important materials but also important video lessons for your UPSC examination. Now on the platform, we have not only put up the Focus magazine but also Compass magazines of different subjects for your prelims examination, as well as other documents including various quizzes which are available to you for your examination perspective. Now today I would like to highlight one of the important aspects with respect to study materials, as you can see here. Now in the section of study materials, you find compilations, GS mains previous question papers, prelims previous question papers, as well as current affairs magazine. Suppose you want to go through some of the previous prelims question papers. So what you have to do is to click here and then go to the select optional subjects. As you can see, here is a wide range of subjects with respect to previous year's UPSC prelims question papers. For example, India and World Geography. All you have to do is to filter it out and click here. Then the particular question paper will appear and you can download for your own purposes. Similarly, this section also provides you with GS mains previous year's papers. What you can do is to choose your own subject. Suppose if I choose economic development and filter out the subject. Then we see that previous year's topic-wise questions have been provided from the year 2013 to 2019. Further in this section, you can also find compilation section, where when you press the prelim section, you can find out that we have provided you all the DNS revision quiz with respect to different subjects. So please go through the entire platform and go through these different sections such as feed wall, study material, prelims test, mains assignment, videos, forum, etc. and find for yourself the important materials in terms of compilation, quizzes, magazines, etc. which we require for your UPSC perspective. So after understanding about the study materials on eLearn platform, these are the important highlights of the news which we will be discussing today. These news have appeared in the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 25th April 2020. Let's start our discussion for today. The first news to be discussed appears on page number 5. It says, Prime Ministers help sought to bring bodies from Gulf Cooperation Council nations. Embassies seeks NOC from Ministry of Home Affairs. Now here in this particular news, what has happened is that the Chief Minister of Kerala has sought intervention of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to bring mortal remains of Indians who have died in the Gulf Cooperation Council countries due to reasons other than COVID-19 virus. So this is what is the context of this particular news. However, from a UPSC perspective, what becomes important is to know about the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. As you can see, a question was asked in the year 2016 in your prelims examination. So in this regard, this topic becomes important from the perspective of current events of international importance. Now the question which was asked was, which of the following is not a member of Gulf Cooperation Council? So in this regard, you need to know who are the members of Gulf Cooperation Council and also why the Gulf Cooperation Council was formed. Now the Gulf Cooperation Council was formed in 1981 in the month of May, and it was done mainly to limit the influence of Iran, and it was led by Sunni dominated Saudi Arabia, which is in constant rivalry with the Shia dominated Iran. So, all Gulf Cooperation Council countries are Sunni countries who are trying to counterbalance Iranian influence or Shia influence. So, these countries are Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, as well as Oman. So, these are the 6 countries with respect to the Gulf Cooperation Council. These are Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, and Oman. Now there are 2 important aspects to be remembered here. First is the fact that all GCC countries are Sunni countries, and second, all GCC countries are monarchs. So these 2 becomes an important aspect to be remembered from the perspective of your UPSC prelims examination. Now in this regard, you must understand that both Saudi Arabia, which is a Sunni dominated country, and Iran, which is a Shia dominated country, wants to increase their sphere of influence around the Persian Gulf as well as in the Middle East. Now you can see the Persian Gulf here, and the countries close to Persian Gulf are all the 6 GCC countries as well as Iran. However, Iran is not a member of GCC countries. Now another important aspect to be understood is that Iraq is not a part of Gulf Cooperation Council countries, and the reason being that first, earlier Iraq had a republican form of government, and usually elections take place in Iraq. And second is the fact that Iraq has a large number of Shia population. So because of these two reasons, Iraq is not a part of Gulf cooperation countries. So this again becomes an important aspect to be remembered from your prelims perspective, that both Iraq as well as Iran are not member of GCC countries. Now, Gulf Cooperation Council is the only international organization of the world in which all members or all countries are monarchies, and nowhere in these 6 countries there is a elected government. So this again becomes an important aspect to be remembered. Now, all these areas around the Persian Gulf also becomes important from the perspective of your world map section, as questions may be framed on account of Persian Gulf, Strait of Hormuz, or even Gulf of Oman. So in this regard, you should know about the world map as well as location of these countries around these 3 important water bodies, namely the Persian Gulf, Strait of Hormuz, as well as Gulf of Oman. Now, the Gulf Cooperation Council is established through a GCC charter, and it is headquartered in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. So after understanding the important aspects of Gulf Cooperation Council countries, let us go back to the question which was asked by UPSC in the year 2016. So as you can see, the question was, which of the following is not a member of Gulf Cooperation Council? So here the correct answer was Iran, as Saudi Arabia, Oman as well as Kuwait are part of Gulf Cooperation Council countries. So in this regard, you should know about the Gulf Cooperation Council from the perspective of current events of international importance, and you should also know about these water bodies, namely the Persian Gulf, Gulf of Oman as well as Strait of Hormuz from the perspective of world geography in your prelims examination. With this, let's move on to our next news discussion. Now the next news appears on page number 14 in the international section. It says, we will build ties in the neighborhood, Taliban. We don't want any foreign outfit using Afghan soil to target another country. Now this news is with respect to peace deal negotiated between Taliban and Afghanistan government led by its president Ashraf Ghani. Now the backdrop to this particular entire peace deal is the fact that United States wants to quickly withdraw from the soil of Afghanistan. The reason being, first, it has been there for the last 19 years, and because of its presence, the expenditure has run into billions of dollars. And also because of the fact that withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan soil has been part of election manifesto of Donald Trump. So considering these 3 aspects, the United States negotiated a peace deal between Taliban and civil government of Afghanistan. So it is in this backdrop that the spokesperson of Taliban has highlighted that it wished to build ties with its neighboring countries including China, Pakistan as well as India. Now this news must be understood from the perspective of this peace deal negotiated by the United States and also its impact on India, because coming of Taliban into power in Afghanistan will be a strategic blow to India. So in this regard, this topic becomes important from your prelims perspective from current events of international importance, and mains gets covered under GS paper 2 specifically with respect to international relations from the perspective of India and its neighborhood relations, and also any agreements between regional or global groupings and its impact on India's interest. Now the major highlights of this peace deal can be said to be withdrawal of US and NATO troops from Afghanistan, exchange of prisoners, that is between Taliban and Afghan security forces, lifting of sanctions from Taliban. The United States had agreed to lift off sanctions from Taliban and in this regard would work actively with the United Nations. And another important aspect of the deal is that Taliban will not attack US as well as NATO forces on ground. Now this deal negotiated by the United States between Taliban and Afghanistan government has put Afghanistan government under severe problem. Now there is no official support by the United States for Ashraf Ghani government to negotiate the deal. Further, it is well understood that if this peace deal succeeds, then it will bring an end to the present Afghan government led by Ashraf Ghani, and this will be a strategic blow to India as well. Now another problematic aspect of this deal is the fact that there is no mention of any fresh election. So the question is that if the deal succeeds, will there be fresh election between Afghanistan government and Taliban, or will the Taliban usurp power in Afghanistan? Now another problematic aspect with respect to this deal is that the deal has treated Taliban as a political group, and so far India along with other countries had treated Taliban as a terrorist organization. So if Taliban comes into power in Afghanistan, then it will be a major problem for India in the entire region. Now, another problematic aspect is the fact that Taliban does not recognize Ashraf Ghani-led government in Afghanistan as government of Afghanistan. So this is another problematic area with respect to this particular deal. Now, there are two aspects to this problem. First, what happens if Taliban wins? And second, what happens if Taliban loses? In either cases, there is a chance of civil war looming large on Afghanistan soil. If Taliban wins, then it will be end of the civil government of Afghanistan. And so if Taliban wins, it will try to occupy the capital of Kabul. And if Taliban loses, that is if their peace deal does not succeed, then there is a high chances of war between Taliban forces as well as between the Afghanistan government. Now these squabbles between Taliban and Afghanistan government will take place when United States withdraw US and NATO forces from Afghan soil. So once withdrawal of US and NATO forces take effects on ground, the likelihood of civil war in Afghanistan increases. And a disturbed Afghanistan will be more suited to Pakistan and not at all suited for India. So the question is that what is the meaning of this positive indication from Taliban, especially the fact that they want to build good relation with its neighboring countries. Now the first aspect here is that Taliban wants to get recognized as a political entity and not as a terrorist organization. Second, Taliban wants to show to the world that it has a positive agenda to engage with Afghanistan government. However, on ground, things are quite different from what they appear. And thirdly, it understands the fact that neighboring countries are important stakeholders in this peace negotiation between Afghanistan government and Taliban. And these neighboring countries include China, Iran, Russia, as well as Pakistan, and also India. Now, here, as you can see, India stands isolated as compared to these countries, namely China, Iran, Russia, and Pakistan. So basically, this peace deal negotiated by United States is a win-win situation not only for Taliban but also for China, Iran, Russia, Pakistan, as well as United States will withdraw all its forces from Afghanistan soil. And overall, this has created huge security implications for India. So in this regard, let us also understand that what can be the security implications for India in case this peace deal succeeds and Taliban comes into power in the area, that is in Afghanistan. Now the first aspect highlighted here is that India has so far not recognized Taliban as a political entity, and India has always recognized Taliban as a non-state actor having links with terror groups like Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, etc., who have targeted Indians in Afghanistan. Now another problematic aspect is the fact that India was not even invited to United Nations-led regional conference on the peace process last week. Now this can be considered as a strategic blow for India, considering the fact that India has invested heavily in Afghanistan through the Afghanistan civil government. And US, in a hurry to withdraw from Afghanistan, has put Taliban back on the negotiating table. And in this regard, India wants Ashraf Ghani-led government to continue in office in Afghanistan. And it does not want Taliban to come into power in Afghanistan. Next, it highlights that Taliban as an organization gets a lot of support from Pakistan as well as ISI. So, Taliban's victory in this peace deal would be a significant blow to India's effort in order to reach to Central Asia through engaging Afghanistan government. Now, another problematic aspect is that if Taliban comes to power in Afghanistan, then there is a high chance that China will get a free access to Afghanistan, and this will be another blow to India's strategic interest in Afghanistan as well as in Central Asia. And lastly, if Taliban comes to power in Afghanistan, then India's effort to fight terrorism in Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir may also suffer a major blow, as ISI, in support with Taliban, will troop its non-state actors into Jammu and Kashmir. So the success of this peace deal and coming of power of Taliban in Afghanistan government will be a major blow to India and its effort which it has taken so far in Afghanistan. So in this regard, let us wait for the final outcome with respect to this particular peace deal between Taliban as well as Afghanistan forces. The next news to be discussed appears on page number 8. It says, no plan to ease fiscal deficit targets. States should trigger their own escape clause, says the chairman of 15th Finance Commission, N.K. Singh. Now, fiscal deficit targets has been fixed at 3% as per the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act of 2003. Now, just like the center has its Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act, similarly states also have their States Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. So in this backdrop, this news highlights that state governments have demanded to increase their fiscal deficit limits to 4 or even 5%. And on this demand to increase fiscal deficit limit considering the COVID-19 situation, the chairman of 15th Finance Commission has highlighted that in order to increase the fiscal deficit limit, the particular state government needs to amend their FRBM Act. So, if a state needs to increase its fiscal deficit target to more than 3%, say to 4 or 5%, then it needs to amend their respective FRBM Act of their own states. Similarly, if center wants to increase the fiscal deficit target from 3% to more than 3%, then it has to bring an amendment in this particular legislation. However, the chairman has said that state governments as well as center can use the escape clause whereby they can increase their fiscal deficit target by 0.5%. Now, this escape clause is one of the provisions which has been provided under the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. Now, this escape clause was also invoked by the Finance Minister of India when she presented the budget of 2020-21 by 0.5%. So, in this regard, let us go through this concept of escape clause as provided under the FRBM Act of 2003. Now, Section 4 of the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act 2003 provides for certain fiscal management principles. It says that the central government shall take appropriate measures to limit the fiscal deficit up to 3% of gross domestic product by 31st March 2021. And according to Section 4 Clause 3, it says that any deviation from fiscal deficit target shall not exceed 0.5% of gross domestic product in a year. So basically under the escape clause of FRBM Act, it allows for a deviation of 0.5 percentage points with respect to fiscal deficit. So it is in this regard that the chairman of 15th Finance Commission has highlighted that states, in order to increase their fiscal deficit limit, needs to amend their respective state FRBM Act. Further, the chairman has highlighted that if states wants to borrow more money, then they can do so under the escape clauses of their respective FRBM Act. So this is what has been provided in this particular news. So in this regard, you must know about the fiscal deficit target has been provided under FRBM Act and also about escape clause which provides for a deviation of 0.5 percentage with respect to fiscal deficit target of states as well as center. The next news appears as a lead article on page number 6. It says, Troughs and crest in pandemic response. The nationalistic turn in global politics has affected vital institutions and partnerships at a time they are needed most. Now, this news highlights that despite knowing the lethality of COVID-19 virus, there has been a governance failure both nationally as well as internationally. Now, the author in this article has stated that there are 3 stages of response in any pandemic situations, and despite knowing these 3 stages of situations or 3 stages of response, there has been an overall governance failure in order to save lives both at national level as well as at international level because of lack of coordination and cooperation among important institutions including medical institutions. So in this regard, let us go through these 3 stages of response as has been highlighted in this article by the author, and also with respect to failure on governance aspect. Here the author has stated 3 points with respect to failure on governance. So let us go through these 3 aspects of failure on governance. Now this topic becomes important primarily from your mains perspective with respect to GS paper 2, specifically under governance as well as under international relations. With respect to governance, this topic gets covered under issues relating to health and government policies and interventions for development in various sectors. So the author highlights that there are 3 known phases with respect to tackling any pandemic including COVID-19 virus. First phase is the recognition of the incoming threat and taking suitable action in order to prevent the spread of the disease. So in this regard, with respect to COVID-19, accordingly, India went for a national lockdown, and this has resulted in a positive way as number of deaths has significantly decreased as what was estimated. Now in the first phase, while recognizing the threat of the attack, this phase is also aimed at buying time so that first of all we can flatten the curve, and second we can ramp up our public healthcare system or public healthcare facilities which are necessary with necessary medical equipments required to tackle the situation or to tackle the epidemic. So from first phase we move on to the second phase. Now second phase response is primarily to ease out economic burden of such people by permitting them a measured return of economic activities. So after the lockdown, the state will slowly allow return of economic activity in a measured stance. So this return of economic activity will ensure livelihoods and also continuity of supply chains which are necessary with respect to essential items. Further, this article highlights that economic relief must be accompanied by expansion of mass testing with respect to the virus on a war footing scale. That is, the government should aim to test each and every individual as far as possible in order to find out the extent of damage done by the coronavirus. Now, the mass testing of the virus allows for contact tracing to be done in various communities. So, from second phase, we move to the third phase. However, the author says that the third phase is very unlikely to be achieved sooner, as the third stage is with respect to finding a cure. And so far, none of the countries of the world are able to find a cure with respect to coronavirus. So, with respect to the third phase, it highlights that the final stage is to find a cure and apply it to the mass and then rebuild economic as well as social life. So it deals with three aspects. First is to find a cure and then apply such cure in the entire society, and then to rebuild economic as well as social life. So the author in this regard highlights that despite knowing these three phases, there have been failure on account of governments across the world. So in this regard, the author has highlighted three important aspects. Let us go through those three important aspects highlighted in this article. The first aspect is with respect to failure to collaborate internationally. So here the author says that rather than finding a solution, the governments across the world were busy initially in blaming each other countries for the spread of this particular virus. So on the first phase itself, when there was a need to recognize the threat and impact of this virus globally, these different countries were blaming each other. So there was a lack of international coordination among these different countries to understand the consequences of the virus and also its impact in terms of deaths which were about to happen. Further, the author highlights that tackling the crisis of this proportion needed a multi-dimensional international cooperation between institutions as well as professionals of different nations of the world. So, in this regard, the author says that in order to build a proper response, there was a need for international cooperation as well as collaboration of epidemiologists whose data-driven models inform policy debates about how and when to lift these quarantines. There was a need for collaboration of medical community in order to identify more effective treatments for this virus, and there was also need for more research scientists so that they could try to find a cure for this vaccine so that we could move to the third phase of this pandemic. However, so far we have not been able to find any particular cure with respect to the COVID-19 virus. So in this regard, the author says that the benefits of intellectual collaboration does not stop at national borders and needs to be extended beyond our national border. So there was definitely lack of coordination and collaboration among different countries because of their historical past or because of their historical rivalries, including India and Pakistan. As the author has highlighted about lack of cooperation between India and Pakistan even on SAARC front due to their rivalries in order to fight the COVID-19 virus. Further, to make the matter worse, the United States has threatened to end funding to World Health Organization, and this only endangers the situation with respect to fighting the COVID-19 virus collectively. So in this regard, the author says that nationalistic turn in global politics over the past few decades have reduced investment and undermined legitimacy of such institutions which facilitate international partnership in times of crisis. The second aspect highlighted by the author is that government strategy in such crisis needs political will and legitimate leadership. Now here the author has provided two examples, one of Germany and the next of Kerala. The author has said that Germany, despite having a high level of federalism, had given enough power to states to tackle the COVID-19 crisis, whereas Kerala has utilized its earlier efforts and investments in public healthcare infrastructure through a coordinated public health strategy, and this has been successful for the state of Kerala and has also been duly supported by its residents. Now, in comparison to Germany and Kerala, some of the states in the United States have not even issued lockdown notice and rather are eager to open economic activities despite advice of their health experts. And the third aspect highlighted by the author is that states or governments should not leave public health services entirely or solely in private hands. And here again the author has provided the example of state of Kerala. The author highlights that the government should invest in their healthcare system and should not leave it entirely in private hands. Now with respect to Kerala, the author has said that Kerala has consistently ranked at the top of states rankings for health expenditures, and this has resulted in a well-functioning local public health system which is capable to implement the test, isolate, and trace protocols, which is critical in order to fight the COVID-19 situation. So these are the three aspects highlighted by the author, whereby more coordination and collaboration is required in order to fight the COVID-19 virus, not only nationally but also internationally. Thus, this topic becomes important primarily from the perspective of your mains examination under GS paper 2. The next news for discussion appears on page number 11. It says, Wildlife Board not for mining in Assam Elephant Reserve. However, environmental activists say that Environment Ministry has overturned its own adverse remark on rampant violation of local forest laws. Now, as per this news, the National Board for Wildlife has recommended coal mining in Elephant Reserve in Assam, and it was approved by National Board for Wildlife Standing Committee under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. And as per the approval, Saliki Reserve forest land has been approved for coal mining. So this topic becomes important primarily from the perspective of general issues on environmental ecology, biodiversity and climate change. Now in this regard, you should know about National Board for Wildlife as well as State Board for Wildlife. Now both these boards are constituted under Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Now the chairperson of National Board for Wildlife is the Prime Minister, whereas the vice chairperson is the Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Whereas with respect to State Board for Wildlife, the chairperson is the Chief Minister and vice chairperson is the Ministry of Environment Forest of the state concerned. So we understand that this topic becomes important from our prelims perspective. Now the Standing Committee for National Board for Wildlife has approved a land of Saliki Reserve Forest, and this Saliki Reserve Forest is a part of Dehing Patkai Elephant Reserve, and this also includes the Dehing Patkai Wildlife Sanctuary. And this wildlife sanctuary covers areas of rainforest and several reserve forests in Shivsagar, Dibrugarh as well as Tinsukia districts of Assam. Now in this regard, you should also know about Elephant in India Conservation Scheme. Now elephants are included in the list of protected species as per the first schedule of Indian Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Now if any animal or species has been provided under Schedule 1 of Wildlife Protection Act, then their hunting or killing is prohibited unless and until for research purposes or either for their conservation. So it says that elephant has been included in Schedule 1 of the Indian Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. And elephants have also been included in CITES, that is Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna. Now the Government of India in the year 2010 declared elephant as the National Heritage Animal of India, and this was done on the recommendations of Standing Committee of National Board for Wildlife. And elephants were declared as a heritage animal by National Board for Wildlife in order to ensure that sufficient protection to elephants were provided and their numbers do not dwindle like what happened with the case of tigers. So there are two important aspects to be remembered here from a prelims perspective. First is the fact that elephants has been included in Schedule 1 of Indian Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, and elephant has also been declared as the National Heritage Animal of India in the year 2010, and this was done as per the recommendation of National Board for Wildlife. Now section 5b provides for Standing Committee of National Board as per the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. It says that a national board may in its discretion constitute a standing committee for the purpose to exercise such powers and perform such duties as may be delegated to the committee by the national board. So basically the standing committee is constituted by the national board and it performs such duties as which is delegated by the National Board for Wildlife. It highlights that the standing committee shall consist of the vice chairperson, member secretary, and not more than 10 members to be nominated by the vice chairperson from amongst members of the national board. Further, it says that the national board may constitute committees, subcommittees, or study groups as may be necessary from time to time in order to properly discharge the functions assigned to the Standing Committee of National Board for Wildlife. So in this regard, we must know about the functions of National Board for Wildlife. It says that the National Board should promote the conservation and development of wildlife and forests by such measures whatever it deems fit. So the National Board for Wildlife can suggest policy measures as well as can advise the central as well as state governments on ways and means in order to promote wildlife conservation and also to effectively control poaching and illegal trade of wildlife and its products. Further, the National Board can make recommendations with respect to setting up of and management of national parks, sanctuaries, and other protected areas on matters relating to restriction of activities in such areas. Further, the board can carry out impact assessment of various projects and activities on wildlife or its habitat. Further, the board can carry out review program with respect to finding out the conservation efforts which are being taken in the country with respect to various species, and can also suggest important measures with respect to wildlife conservation. And also, the board helps in preparing as well as publishing a status report at least once in 2 years on wildlife in the country. So these can be said to be some of the important functions of National Board for Wildlife in India. So after understanding about National Board for Wildlife, let us also understand about the Project Elephant. Now, Project Elephant is a central government sponsored scheme and was launched in February 1992. And through this Project Elephant scheme, the government helps in protection and management of elephants to states having wild elephants in a free ranging population. Further, this project ensures protection of elephant corridors and elephant habitat for survival of the elephant population in the wild. And in this regard, it is the obligation of the central government to provide technical and financial aid as well as help to such states to carry out and achieve the goals with respect to Project Elephants. Further, the central government also provide help with respect to census of the elephants, training of field officials, and also ensure mitigation and prevention with respect to man-elephant conflict. Further, the central government agency as well as state government agencies coordinate to prevent illegal trade of elephants as well as its parts including ivory, and also ensure protection to elephants from poachers as well as hunters. Thus, these can be said to be some of the important aspects with respect to Project Elephant. Now, as per the Government of India, there are 32 elephant reserves in India. And the very first elephant reserve or elephant sanctuary was the Singhbum Elephant Reserve of Jharkhand. Now, in the PDF, we have provided you the list of the entire 32 elephant reserves in India. So, what you can do is to go through these entire list and also the state in which these elephant reserves are stated. Thus, this article becomes important primarily from our prelims perspective, and in this regard, you should know that National Board for Wildlife is chaired by the Prime Minister and State Board for Wildlife is chaired by the Chief Minister. Now, the next news appears in the editorial section on page number 6. It says, no 100% quota. Supreme Court ruling stresses that overzealous reservation tends to affect rights of other communities. Now, this topic with respect to 100% reservation and subsequent Supreme Court judgment has been covered on 23rd April 2020 by Mangal sir. So what you can do is to go through the highlights, whatever has been covered in this DNS dated 23rd April 2020 with respect to this particular judgment of Supreme Court. Now, this editorial highlights about Article 371D. Now, Article 371D caters to special provisions with respect to the state of Andhra Pradesh, and this article comes under Part 21 of the Indian Constitution, especially with respect to temporary, transitional and special provisions. Now, in this part, you must know about special provisions which have been provided with respect to other states. Article 371 provides for special provision with respect to states of Maharashtra and Gujarat. 371A provides for Nagaland, 371B for Assam, 371C for Manipur, 371D for Andhra Pradesh, 371E for establishment of Central University in Andhra Pradesh, 371F for special provision with respect to state of Sikkim, 371G with respect to state of Mizoram, 371H with respect to Arunachal Pradesh, 371I with respect to state of Goa, and 371J with respect to state of Karnataka. So for these states, the constitution provides for certain special provisions. So in this regard, you must know about these certain special provisions with respect to these following states under Article 371 to 371J of the Indian Constitution. Now, after our discussion, these are your summary for your prelims examination. So today we have discussed important aspects with respect to members of Gulf Cooperation Council, which are Saudi Arab, UAE, Oman, Qatar, Bahrain as well as Kuwait. And all these countries are Sunni monarchies. However, Iran as well as Iraq are not members of GCC countries, and these countries are surrounded by Persian Gulf, Strait of Hormuz as well as Gulf of Oman. Further, we also studied about peace negotiation between Afghanistan government and Taliban, which is brokered by the United States of America. Now, this deal mainly deals with withdrawal of US and NATO forces from the Afghan soil, and also this news becomes important primarily from the perspective of impact of this deal on India's security implications. Now, in this regard, a mains question for practice has been provided for you. The question says, the proposed withdrawal of United States and NATO forces from Afghanistan in the wake of peace deal between Taliban and Afghanistan government is fraught with major security implications for the region and also for India? Discuss. And you can answer this question in 250 words and it carries 15 marks. Further, we also studied about Finance Commission and also the fact that Finance Commission is constituted under Article 280 of the Indian Constitution. We also discussed the escape clause with respect to FRBM Act, whereby Section 4 of the Act mentions about the escape clause. And we also studied or discussed about the state's demand to increase fiscal deficit so that the states can borrow more. Further, we also studied about National as well as State Board for Wildlife, their powers, duties and functions under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, about conservation of elephants under Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act, elephant as National Heritage Animal of India, about Project Elephant and about various elephant reserves. And lastly, we discussed about special provisions with respect to certain states under Article 371 to 371J of the Indian Constitution. So these can be said to be the summary with respect to our prelims as well as mains examination for 25th April 2020. Now after our discussion, this is your question for the day. The question is, Constitution of India provides for special provision for which of the following states? Options are 1. Andhra Pradesh, 2. Manipur, 3. Goa, 4. Karnataka. So the question reads, select the correct answer using the code given below. Option A, 1, 2 and 4 only. Option B, 3 and 4 only. Option C, 1 and 2 only. And option D, 1, 2, 3 and 4. Now coming to the answer of yesterday, the question was, recently RBI has carried out a special open market operation called Operation Twist. Which of the following best characterizes Operation Twist? In this, the correct answer is C, that is buying long-term bonds and simultaneously selling short-term securities. So with this, we come to an end to today's discussion. Thank you.